Hello, my name is Bill Hemphill, and among other things, I am a retired Air Force Major, hence Major Bill. In the military, we send our new recruits through basic training or boot camp to give them some basic understanding and indoctrination before specialty schools. The purpose of this and the other 4 presentations is to give you the basics, not to make you contracting experts. These presentations are designed to give you a glimpse into the world of government contracting and the adversarial nature of this world. Contract administration is a situational discipline, and a great deal of the regulations interpretation is dependent upon a firm's ownership, product or services, market, path to market, and a number of other variables. So what you will get in these 5 chapters is a, quote, 35,000-foot view, unquote. If, however, you have company-specific questions, please feel free to contact me directly. While the 5 presentations were developed in sequence and build upon prior training, they can be viewed out of sequence if you wish. Here you can see some of my bona fides and a rationale for why you might want to spend your valuable time finishing this presentation. While you are looking this over, let me give you a mission statement for contract administration that applies to all business types, locations, or sizes. Our function is to mitigate risk for the firm while expanding business, and toward that end we can never stop learning, reading, and thinking about federal procurement law. Now on to the next slide. Let's start with a basic description of 3 major differences between commercial and government contracting. And by the way, whenever the term government is capitalized, it refers to the federal government. Government contracting is more highly regulated, has the contract as the end of negotiations, and presumes that the contractor is totally knowledgeable of all the terms to which they have agreed. Let's examine more closely this last statement. If you receive a solicitation with hidden Federal Acquisition Regulations or FAR clauses included by reference and submit a proposal without any exceptions, the government will presume an award can be made without any further discussion, and that you can be held accountable for all of the terms. Every firm, large or small, needs to have access to a contracts professional, either on staff, through outside legal counsel, or a consultant, to mitigate the risk of not being able to perform to the government's expectation and perhaps getting penalized. In this chapter, we will discuss less obvious requirements that can be enforced upon unwary contractors. Here are the gotcha topics we'll be discussing. Take a moment to look them over, and then we'll proceed. In the culture of federal contract law, there is a doctrine that is both feared by contractors and beloved by contracting officers, or KOs. It is referred to as the Christian doctrine, and it has nothing to do with the religion. In 1963, the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals, or ASBCA, heard a case involving a contractor named G.L. Christian and Associates and the Department of the Air Force. The Air Force KO had terminated Christian's contract for convenience, which means that the termination was not for lack of contractor performance or anything that Christian had done wrong. The current FAR was not in place in 1963, but the clause in today's FAR can be found at 52.249-1 through -5. And I'm giving you a range because it depends on the type of contract which clause applies. Christian contended that since the KO had inadvertently left the requisite clause out of the contract, Christian did not have to honor the termination. The ASBCA found for the government, saying in part that when a clause is included in a solicitation or contract as a normal course of business for the agency issuing the document, but inadvertently left out of a specific contract action, the contractor had to act as if the omitted clause was present and in full force. This has become known as the Christian doctrine. Now, the current regulations, the FAR and its supplements, were first issued in August 1984, but the Christian doctrine survived that event and has seen more life recently when the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or Stimulus Act, was codified into the FAR in 2009. Now to the next topic. In Chapter 2, we mentioned that Section I of a standard solicitation or contract usually contains a laundry list of FAR and supplement clauses, quote, included by reference, unquote, or simply annotated by their index number, title, and issue date. For example, a line entry might read 52.219-9, comma, Small Business Subcontracting Plan, comma, June 2012. Now it is the responsibility of the contractor to know the contract content of the clause and its ramifications. In some agencies' non-standard solicitations and contracts, secondary websites or electronic documents may be included by reference and often contain a large number of FAR and supplement clauses. So these should be pursued by the contractor, or you may be signing up to some onerous clauses and not even be aware of it. The philosophy in this instance, once again, is that the government fully expects the contractor to know what they're signing up to and the ramifications, making ignorance of the content not a viable defense for failure to perform. Let's see how this might present itself. Here's a real-world example of how the government might embed IBR clauses. Some Amtrak and municipal light rail contracts include by reference a Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, circular. FTA is a part of the U.S. Department of Transportation, or the federal government. When researched, this circular contains some FAR clauses and references to other federal documents that likewise contain FAR clauses. So on the surface, the rail contract might appear to be a basic commercial contract. In reality, it has buried FAR clauses. Hidden FAR or supplement clauses, however, is not a situation limited to federal contracts. An unexpected surprise is finding embedded FAR clauses in a state and municipal government infrastructure contract. Usually these are mass transit, highway, or water processing contracts. It is almost an axiom that current state and municipal governments are poor as church mice when it comes to funding infrastructure projects, so they turn to the federal government for financial help. Now, in government contract management, there is a rule of thumb that where the federal money goes, the rules will follow. In order to find these buried clauses, one must read and research intelligently. Look at all reference websites and ancillary documents. Read them carefully, looking for any references that might be federal. Then understand what you are signing up for. There are two significant parts to this clause that currently appears in every contract. First is the requirement for the contractor, or prime contractor, to report total executive compensation for the top 5 paid executives. This requirement becomes active if and only if the contractor meets a twofold test. First, did the firm have over $25 million in revenue from federal sources in the previous fiscal year? And did the firm also have over 80% of its annual revenue from federal sources? If a contractor doesn't meet both tests, they do not have to report the compensation. The second part of this clause requires that all contractors awarding some subcontracts, as defined at FAR 44.101, valued at more than $25,000, to report those contracts and the subcontractor's total executive compensation if that subcontractor meets the twin tests we described above. The subcontractor reporting is the most overlooked aspect of this clause. Now let's take a look at some accounting systems practices. Cost accounting standards was originally set up to establish a common accounting system for government contractors who did not already have a standard accounting practice. It has grown into a cottage industry due to the preference for CAS-covered contracts by the Defense Contract Audit Agency, or DCAA. DCAA is the Department of Defense's contract audit arm. Today, in order to have a compliant system, a contractor almost always has to have specific and expensive accounting software and trained employees. However, some hope. Here are categories of contractors that are exempt from CAS. Now, I've listed most of them here, most of the obvious ones. There are 2 or 3 that aren't on this list. But you get the gist of it, that if you are on this list, you should take exception to any clauses in the range of 52.230-1 through -6. Those are the implementing clauses for cost accounting standards. No matter how a contractor may have bid an original contract, and even if they took exception to FAR Part 31, it may still crop up. When a contractor proposes a modification to a contract they already hold, such an award would meet the definition of a sole source award, also referred to as other than full and open competition, in accordance with FAR 6.3. This same rationale would apply if you submitted a request for equitable adjustment in accordance with Defense FAR Supplement 250.243-7002 or a termination settlement proposal in accordance with FAR 49.6. Part 31 imposes non-commercial record keeping and justification requirements, only slightly less intense than CAS. So a contractor needs to be aware of these modification requirements and take exception unless they are capable of meeting them. This is one of the clauses that shows up in the FTA circular mentioned previously. An unwary contractor might miss the fact that FAR 31 is being imposed on them unless the research was done. The next topic, mandatory disclosure. This aspect of federal procurement law has achieved significance in the past few years, and the bottom line is that the punishment for discovery of violations by government auditors is more severe than would be the case if the contractor self-reported. However, that looks good on paper, but there is no proof that this is indeed the case, as several self-reporting contractors have been treated very roughly by the government. The real thorny issue is the False Claims Act portion. Now, making a false statement is part of the False Claims Act, and although the original intent was to catch folks who were very liberal with their invoicing practices, there have been contractors caught making promises and proposals that they knew they could not meet. And they probably knew this when they submitted the proposal. So one needs to be wary of making a false statement. Here are some mistakes that new contractors might make, as discussed in this chapter. The most profound advice to come from this section is the government expects that you have full understanding of the requirements you're signing up for. Make sure you do know and are not surprised later on. You will find that government contracting is loaded with acronyms, and here are the ones that we discussed today, either in the slides or the narrative. I strongly recommend that you jot these down, as you might need them in the future, because the more knowledgeable you appear to be to the government, the more you can speak their language, the greater the credibility you'll have, and the less likely that the government will force their contract desires on your firm. Finally, here's how you can reach me if you have any specific questions or need additional support. Thank you for your attention and have a great day.